Just say it, man. Don't make me ask 20 questions.
What is the point?
Get to the point.
Just say it already!
Welcome to the Podcram. Since Hobbes' Leviathan, I've been interested in this concept of society being an organism unto itself. David Friedberg had a lot to say about this recently on the All In podcast, and so did Tucker Carlson on Joe Rogan. Keep an eye out for my deeper dive into this subject in an upcoming episode of the Psychic Lube podcast.
Taking a step back, this is going to get a little esoteric, but I think humans organize into social systems. One social system is a family, one is a company, and I think that the government is a social system. The point of a social system is to get influence to achieve the things you want to achieve by aggregating together, by creating a tribe, by creating a system. And that's what a government is. It lets a lot of people pool resources to get things done as a group that you wouldn't otherwise be able to get done individually. Same with a company, same with a family, to support each other, et cetera. And I think that the problem with democratically elected governments, or all governments for that matter, frankly, is like any other system. And I've said this in the past, they have a natural incentive to grow. I met with a government person the other day, well-known government person, and I was struck by the tone. I've been struck by the tone on multiple people I've met from the government on here's all the next things I'm going to get done, and here's how we're going to grow and do more and be bigger. Just like if you're running a company, that's your incentive. That's your model of thinking. And like with your family, you want to grow the balance sheet for your family. You want to have another home. You want to take care of, you want to build security, et cetera. So governments as an organizing system are no different. And so I think that in a democracy, over time, there is, as Sachs points out, a group of folks who get elected, and as a result, like a philosophy that endures in that system, that is all about overcoming the power that is, that we all view there to be powers that are keeping us from doing the things we want to do. And I think that this is the ultimate manifestation of what happens, is that you push the government to be as big as possible with no end, and you push the government to destroy any system of power that gets in the way of those who are able to vote these folks in. And now a lot of folks who thought that they were supporting liberal causes to help those in need are realizing that you're actually repressing minorities in the process.
What do you think that we should do in America right now?
I think we should unwind a lot of laws. And I think we should have as a mandate, the objective is, how do we get more of our economy and more of our people in this country to be supported by and progress through private industry rather than public support? The federal government and the role that the federal government has in funding industry, in hiring individuals, in pumping dollars into markets, I think has gotten so far beyond the tell that we, as we know, are being sloshed back and forth based on the decisions being made by the Federal Reserve. That should have never been the case. The free market should have always been allowed to operate. Progress should have always been allowed. The government should have stopped people from being hurt, should stop negative outcomes. But the idea that the government should come in and start to run things and employ people and get to the scale that it's gotten to, this is the largest organization in human history, the U.S. federal government. It has got the highest dollar spend, the highest budget of any organization in human history. Even accounting for the Roman Empire, there should be accountability standards for every law, which is how do I know that this thing did what it was supposed to do, and how do I measure if it didn't? And by the way, if it doesn't, and the dollars aren't returned to me at some multiple, we shut that law down. We shut that department down. We move on. There should be an accountability standard for every dollar that's spent. But we don't describe any outcomes. We don't say, here's the standard of measure, and here's the accountability. And if this doesn't work, and if this dollar isn't returned to us, we don't spend it anymore. And we don't keep doing this thing over and over again, and then layer something else on top, and layer something else on top. And then you've got 10 layers of nothing accountable to anything, and the thing costs 10 times as much to do half as much. I am optimistic still. I'm always an optimist.
Oh, make sure you put in that caveat. Good.
Yeah. Yeah, I've worked across a number of federal agencies in businesses I've been involved in. And I can tell you it is, as I'm sure you would expect, there's a lot of bureaucratic morass in these agencies. And if you think about it, it's because the agencies are effectively, under the Chevron doctrine, vested unlimited authority to create rules and regulations that they then determine are meant to represent the laws that were passed by Congress. But more often than not, those rules and regulations begin to bleed outside of the lines of the intention of the laws when they were passed. And this is because those agencies, by creating new rules and regulations, and this isn't some like, I have a subversive reason for doing this, but these agencies have an incentive for creating more rules and regulations because they then get to go back to Congress and ask for more budget and hire more people and grow the importance and the scale of their agency. This is the natural kind of organic growth that arises in any living system, and any organization of individuals is also a living system and has the same incentive. It wants to have more resources. It wants to get bigger. It wants to do more stuff. It wants to be more important. And the Chevron doctrine has allowed agencies to operate independent and outside of the lines that were defined in the laws that were passed, that then vested them this authority, that then they can go and say, I want more budget, I want to get bigger. And I'm optimistic that this ruling will limit the agency's authorities and limit their ability to create more bureaucratic overhead, more headcount, more individuals that need to now go and administer the rules and regulations that they themselves create. And so I'm actually very optimistic and hopeful about this change. Now, the downside, the negative to this, is that there are a number of really important regulatory roles that agencies have come to play that never got passed as bills, like environmental protection rules. And there's a negative consequence that will arise to some degree with respect to health of the environment, health of people, et cetera. But I think net, Congress needs to do its job. It needs to go back to session and it needs to sit down and needs to pass laws that really clearly define what is and what isn't going to be legal going forward. And then the agencies operate strictly within those bounds.
So to recap, it could get a little messy, but it's a better, healthier system because this system has become super bloated over 40 years.
Well, Friedberg, what's your theory?
I've got a theory.
Oh, theory. Here we go. Good.
I was trying to figure out why we seem to be like embracing socialist principles. Like why I keep seeing more of this stuff become mainstream and almost become normalized. And I was looking at the total GDP of the United States is $25 trillion. The federal budget for next year is proposed to be $7.2 trillion. And state and local budgets combined is about $4 trillion. So if you look at government spending, it's about half of GDP now, state, local, and federal, which roughly equates to about half of people in the United States are employed directly by government or indirectly because the government is the primary revenue source of their business. And I think that that's why this set of policies, and I'm not talking about the tax on the centimillionaires as much as a simple disregard for the fact that the United States, over time, the prosperity that we've realized has been driven by a free market economy, by enterprising individuals going out and saying, there are people that are asking for things. I'm going to figure out a way to build those things and make it for them and sell it to them. People will pay for it. They will work hard to do it. And the incentive structure in a free market has enabled productivity improvements and enabled ultimately prosperity. But we've reached a tipping point. And the tipping point is when half or more of the population begins to be employed by the government, at which point that concept is lost. Because now it is the government that is the employer, not one's own individual liberties and ability to go out and be enterprising. And so I think that the budget of government tipping to 50% of GDP is the reason why these policies become mainstream. That's my theory. And so it's a relationship of government spending as a percent of total GDP, which translates into employment. You guys
very reasonable. Scary, but reasonable.
Well, you know who said something similar? Back when Mitt Romney ran for president, he was caught on tape saying something to the effect that 47% of Americans were net government recipients.
Yep.
And if that number ever got to 51%, then basically the free market system would be finished because it'd be
That's
more,
where we are. That's
more
where
takers
we are.
than makers.
Tipping
more
point.
takers than makers. And he was forced to apologize for that. But there is a fundamental logic to it.
I wouldn't use the term taker, Sachs, because there are hardworking people that work for the government. So it's not necessarily about just taking a free check, or there's certainly an aspect of that to some degree, but it is about the government becoming the primary supporter of individuals in this country through employment, or through subsidies or through checks or through what have you.
Yeah,
But
I think that's
becomes-
fair. Yeah, I
yeah.
think that's totally fair. I'm not disparaging the efforts of legitimate government workers because you do need a government. And
or private company workers
Yeah.
that just happen to have the government as their only customer.
right. But the point is that when you become a government employee, you have a vested interest in government.
This is what organizations do. They protect themselves. They exist for their own benefit. All human organizations, from the Church Bake Sale Committee to the Department of Justice, they all are the same. They're an organism, just like any other. And an organism's main goal is to survive and reproduce, to get bigger. And you just see this throughout the federal bureaucracy. Well, it just so happens that the largest human organization in history is the federal government of the United States. And so all of this stuff benefits, it accrues to its own power. That's why, like, let's say you believed every scientific claim about global climate change. You would not reach the same policy conclusions. You'd be like, well, the first thing we need to do is ban private air travel, because obviously that doesn't make any sense. And then the second thing we need to do is, whatever. You'd look at it rationally from a scientific, if you bought the premise. No, you go through every climate demand. Not one of them disempowers large organizations, whether it's NGOs or the government of the United States. Not one of them. They all make the government more powerful, and they all make you less powerful. So that's when you know it's not really about the temperature of the Earth's atmosphere. It's about making them more powerful and disempowering you. And it's not about who runs those agencies. The bigger the agency, the more effective it will be in doing what all human organizations do, which is protect themselves and increase their power. It's like that. It's fundamental. I guess that's what I'm saying. It's not about, elect Trump, it'll change. No.
I've learned over the years that there's nothing more expensive than a cheap lawyer. So I've got a couple good lawyers that I work with on just contractual stuff. And one of them is named Ivan Hanel. I call him the Bull. And I've learned to appreciate
Shout out to Ivan.
The infinite complexity of law and legal, right?
Very.
So if there is this natural progression as we're talking about life, I mean, we even see it in our own human interactions, right? This intricate complexity of how things work and how even in the way we behave with each other socially. Right. You look at when I was in the government, you could look at a terrorist link analysis, and that link analysis still follows those fractal patterns. The patterns in our lungs, the patterns of lightning, the patterns of super Magellanic clouds and galaxies, superclusters of galaxies, all have that same pattern. And it's not just a physical pattern. It's a social pattern, right? Even in something as silly but fundamental as law, there are these patterns that continue to spin off.
Thanks for listening to this installment of The Podgram. I hope it contains something useful for you. If you enjoy these selections and are curious about the curator's own thoughts, you can check out my other podcast, Psychic Lube, where I share concise concepts meant to grease the intellectual gears and help get your creative juices flowing. Each episode is an ongoing collaborative project that welcomes listeners to expand or rebut its points by email or comment, the most interesting of which get incorporated through periodic re-recordings. As always, if you're intrigued by today's content, I encourage you to go listen to the full podcast in its original form directly from its creators so that their sponsors keep paying them to make stuff for us and nobody feels compelled to sue me for copyright infringement. Now, get off your phone and go do smart stuff. Have a productive day.